50 million people were watching. Live. Unfiltered. Two men who hadn't spoken in 2 decades. One of the most iconic comedy duos in history, suddenly standing face to face on stage. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. They hugged. They cried. America cried with them. It was supposed to be a moment of healing, a surprise reunion engineered by Frank Sinatra himself. For a fleeting moment, it looked like the pain of the past had been buried. But then, something no one expected happened. Dean leaned in. He whispered something into Jerry's ear. The cameras didn't catch it. The microphones didn't record it. But whatever Dean said, it changed Jerry's face instantly. The joy drained. The tears turned heavy. And just like that, the moment of reconciliation twisted into something else entirely. For 41 years, Jerry Lewis refused to reveal what Dean whispered. He took it to the grave, or so everyone thought. But now, that secret is out. And once you hear what Dean Martin said during that emotional embrace, you'll never see that reunion the same way again. Before they were legends, they were just 2 hungry performers, each one drowning in obscurity. Dean Martin was a nightclub crooner with movie star looks and silky vocals, but he couldn't catch a break. He was smooth, charming, forgettable. Jerry Lewis was 20, chaotic, loud, rubber-faced, a walking cartoon with endless energy and no direction. They met backstage at a struggling New York club in 1946. 2 stars with no spotlight. But something clicked, something instant and electric. They decided to try a one-night act together. What happened that night changed show business forever. Dean stood cool and composed, trying to sing, while Jerry crashed the party with wild antics, mimicking him, tripping, clowning, exploding with physical comedy. The contrast was perfect. Smooth versus manic. Ice versus fire. The audience erupted. Not just laughter. Screaming, standing ovations, pure chaos. People hadn't seen anything like it. Within months, Martin and Lewis were the hottest ticket in the country. Sold out nightclubs, magazine covers, Hollywood deals. The chemistry wasn't just act deep. Off stage, they were inseparable. Brothers in everything but blood. They finished each other's sentences. They knew each other's rhythms. They had their own language. The bond wasn't forced. It was pure, raw magic. From 1949 to 1956, they released 16 hit movies, broke box office records, and became the biggest comedy team America had ever seen. But even at their peak, when the world was laughing with them, the fire that forged them was already starting to burn too hot. As the crowds got louder and the checks got bigger, something darker crept in behind the scenes. To the public, Jerry Lewis was the genius, the wild, untamed force of nature that made people howl with laughter. Critics praised his physical comedy, his timing, his vision. He was called the next Chaplin, the future of comedy. Dean? He was just the singer, the straight man, the guy who stood there while Jerry got the laughs, the sidekick. But Dean Martin wasn't a sidekick. He knew exactly how vital he was to the act. His cool, his control, his presence were the perfect counterbalance to Jerry's chaos. Without Dean, there was no Martin and Lewis. And that quiet disrespect from the press, it cut deep. Meanwhile, Jerry was evolving. Fast. He wasn't just the clown anymore. He wanted to direct, to control, to own the creative direction of their films. He began making decisions without Dean, rewriting scenes, commandeering the spotlight. The duo that once shared everything was becoming Jerry and Appo's show, and Dean knew it. On stage, they still had magic. They still made millions laugh. But backstage, silence, coldness, resentment. Dean started to show up late. Jerry snapped at assistants. They and Appo's barely speak before curtain time. The brotherhood was fracturing. Dean once joked to a friend, "They think I'm his valet." But there was truth behind the humor, and it was festering. What once felt like a partnership was now a slow suffocation, a storm building behind fake smiles and red carpets. And that storm finally broke in 1956. July 24th, 1956. The Copacabana nightclub in New York City was packed, standing room only. Fans had no idea they were witnessing the end of an era. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis took the stage like they always had. The chemistry was still there. The laughs still landed. They played the hits, hit the beats, delivered the routine. But behind the polished performance, they weren't even speaking. Not before the show. Not after. Not even backstage. They didn't tell the audience it was their final show. There was no farewell speech. No thank you. No tribute to their years together. Just one last act. One final bow. And then they walked off opposite sides of the stage, into the darkness. That was it. 10 years of laughter, 15 blockbuster films, countless sold-out tours, all gone in one silent exit. The public was stunned when the news broke. But insiders weren't. The tension had been growing for years, and now it had exploded. What followed wasn't just a professional split. It was a full-blown fracture of friendship. Lawyers got involved. Contracts had to be dissolved. Movie deals, revenue splits, joint ventures, all torn apart. But the legal mess wasn't the worst of it. The real wreckage was personal. Dean and Jerry didn't just stop performing. They stopped speaking. Entirely. No calls. No letters. No eye contact at industry events. They wouldn't even say each other's names in interviews. Jerry told the press that Dean abandoned him. Dean told friends that Jerry was impossible to work with. Each man believed he'd been betrayed. And Hollywood? Hollywood picked sides. From brothers to bitter strangers, the breakup at the Copo wasn't just quiet. It was surgical and final. While Dean and Jerry retreated into silence, one man refused to give up on them: Frank Sinatra. Frank had watched the partnership blossom, watched the breakup unfold, and it tore him up inside. He wasn't just another celebrity peer, he was close to both men. He'd performed with them, drank with them, laughed with them. He knew what they'd meant to each other, and what it cost them to walk away. For years, Frank tried to heal the rift, subtly at first. He'd invite them both to the same parties. Dean would RSVP. Jerry would cancel. He'd suggest a dinner. Jerry would agree, until he learned Dean was coming. He even floated the idea of a charity reunion. Dean didn't bother to reply. The pain ran deep, deeper than Frank realized. But he never stopped trying. Because Frank Sinatra wasn't the kind of man who accepted broken things, especially not broken friendships. And he believed, deep down, that if he could just get them in the same room, maybe something would change. Then, in 1976, Frank saw an opportunity. Jerry Lewis had become the face of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Every year, he hosted a 20-hour live telethon, a marathon of comedy, performance, and heartfelt fundraising for kids in need. It was Jerry's most vulnerable moment of the year. No script, no edits, just raw emotion and exhaustion broadcast to millions. And Frank thought, what better time to strike? What if Dean just appeared? What if, after 2 decades of silence, he walked onto that stage, live, and hugged his old friend in front of 50 million people? Not just for closure, not just for nostalgia, but maybe for healing. Frank started calling, and he didn't stop. Frank Sinatra picked up the phone. "Dean, I want you to do something for me." Dean Martin didn't even let him finish. No, he didn't need to hear the details. He already knew what this was about, and he wasn't interested. "Just hear me out," Frank insisted. "It's the telethon. Jerry's telethon. I want you to walk out with me. Say hello. That's all." Dean's voice turned cold. "I'm not doing that. It's been 20 years, Dean. Don't you think it's time?" Dean didn't hesitate. Time for what? For him to humiliate me on national television? No thanks. But Frank wasn't asking, not really. He was begging. He called again the next day, and the day after that. For 2 straight weeks, Frank Sinatra, the most powerful man in showbiz, kept calling, pushing, persuading. "He misses you, Dean," Frank said quietly. "I know he does. If he misses me," Dean snapped, "he knows where to find me." Frank changed tactics. He stopped making it about Jerry. He made it about himself. "I'm asking you, Dean. Not for him. For me." That landed. Because no matter how stubborn Dean Martin was, he had one unshakable code: loyalty. And if Frank was asking, truly asking, he couldn't say no forever. Finally, Dean gave in. "I'll do it," he said. "But not for Jerry. For you." It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a favor. A performance. A transaction sealed with a condition. And that, Dean made sure to remember, because he planned to make sure Jerry remembered it too. September 5th, 1976. The airwaves were electric. For nearly 20 hours, Jerry Lewis had been on stage, exhausted, hoarse, and emotionally raw, hosting his annual MDA Labor Day telethon. It was a tradition, a cause, and for Jerry, a personal mission. He'd raised millions. He'd entertained millions more. But he had no idea the most unforgettable moment of his career was about to walk right onto that stage. Around 11:30 p.m., Frank Sinatra casually strolled into the spotlight. The crowd erupted. Frank was always a welcome guest, always a showstopper. Jerry grinned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with pride, "Frank Sinatra." They embraced. They shared a few words about the cause, the kids, the money raised. It was business as usual until Frank paused. "I've got a friend here tonight," he said, glancing off stage. "He loves what you're doing for these kids, and he just wanted to come out and say hello." Jerry's smile twitched. Confusion crept in. "Who?" he asked. And then, Dean Martin walked onto the stage. The audience gasped. Audibly, you could hear the breath leave the room. 50 million people watching at home suddenly froze. And so did Jerry. His face went white. His body locked. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. For a split second, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. A memory. A wound that had never healed. Dean wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing it cool. He looked nervous, vulnerable even. Not the king of cool. Not the suave Rat Pack legend. Just a man walking toward his former best friend, uncertain of what he'd find on the other side. Jerry stood there, frozen. "We hadn't spoken in 20 years, he later said. And now here he was, walking toward me. Live. In front of 50 million people. The world stopped. And then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, Dean opened his arms. And Jerry crumbled into them. They hugged. Not a polite showbiz pat on the back. Not a handshake with a smile. A real hug. Raw. Shaking. Unfiltered. Jerry started to cry. Dean's eyes were wet too. And somewhere off to the side, Frank Sinatra stood watching it all, wiping tears from his face. It was beautiful. Powerful. Healing. Or so it seemed. Because just then, Dean leaned in and whispered something into Jerry's ear. The cameras didn't catch it. The microphones didn't hear it. But Jerry heard every word. And what he heard didn't bring closure. It shattered him. In living rooms across America, families watched through tear-filled eyes. It felt like something sacred. Two legends, once inseparable, torn apart by time and pride, now embracing in front of millions. But while America saw closure, Jerry Lewis felt something else. Because in the middle of that tearful hug, Dean Martin leaned in. He brought his mouth close to Jerry's ear. His lips moved. Just for a moment. Just 3 seconds. No one heard what he said. No one could read his lips. But everyone saw something change. Jerry's expression, joyful just seconds earlier, flickered. The tears kept falling, but now they were heavier. Not healing tears. Wounded ones. Dean pulled back. Jerry nodded silently, his face suddenly fragile. His body tried to recover, to perform. He straightened his jacket, wiped his cheeks, smiled for the camera. They exchanged small talk. Dean said he admired the telethon. Jerry thanked him for coming. Frank beamed beside them like a proud parent. And just like that, the moment was over. Dean left the stage. The hug had lasted less than 10 seconds. The entire reunion, not even 5 minutes. But its impact would last decades. Later that night, reporters swarmed Jerry backstage. "What did Dean say to you?" Jerry just smiled. A sad, distant kind of smile. "That's between me and Dean," he said quietly. And for over 40 years, he kept that secret. Not to the press, not to friends, not even to his children. But anyone who saw Jerry in that moment, anyone who watched closely, knew something had shifted inside him. Because that wasn't just a hug, and that wasn't just a whisper. It was a wound reopening. For over 4 decades, that whisper remained one of television's great unsolved mysteries. Interviewers asked. Documentarians speculated. Fans pleaded. But Jerry never broke. "That was just for me," he'd say. Or simply, "I'll never tell." Not to Barbara Walters. Not to close friends. Not even to his own children. But the moment haunted him. Every time Dean Martin's name came up in conversation, Jerry's expression would shift. His eyes would glaze over. His voice would soften. It was like he was replaying the moment. Not the hug, but the words. And then, in 2017, Jerry Lewis died at the age of 91. Most assumed the secret had died with him. But it hadn't. Shortly before his death, Jerry had one final, deeply personal conversation with his son, Joseph. It was a moment of reflection, vulnerability, the kind of honesty that only comes when you know time is running out. And in that moment, Jerry told him what Dean had whispered on that stage, in front of 50 million people, hidden behind a curtain of tears and applause. 7 words. According to Joseph Lewis, This is what Dean Martin whispered to Jerry Lewis that night. "I'm doing this for Frank, not for you." Just 7 words. But they hit like a punch to the chest. Jerry had thought, hoped, that Dean was there because he missed him, because he forgave him, because after 20 years of silence, Dean wanted to make things right. But that wasn't the reason. Dean was there because Frank asked him to be, because it was a favor, a performance, a transaction, and worse, Dean wanted Jerry to know it. Why would Dean Martin say something so cold, so final, in a moment that the world saw as healing? Why, after 2 decades of silence, would he walk onto that stage, hug his old friend, only to pierce the moment with a sentence that shattered everything? Because Dean Martin couldn't fake it. Not for Jerry, not for the cameras, not even for himself. Dean had spent his life playing it cool, cracking jokes, sipping whiskey with the Rat Pack. But when it came to emotions, he didn't pretend. He hated phoniness. He despised performance when it came to real feelings. And forgiveness? That wasn't something he could manufacture on cue. People close to Dean said he still carried pain from the breakup, that he felt sidelined, humiliated, discarded by someone he'd once loved like a brother. That underneath the tuxedos and cocktails, Dean Martin was a man who remembered everything, every slight, every wound, every betrayal. So when Frank Sinatra begged him to walk onto that stage, Dean agreed, but with conditions. He would show up. He would hug. He would smile. But he would not lie. He would not let Jerry walk away thinking it was all okay again. So he whispered the truth. "I'm doing this for Frank, not for you." Not to hurt Jerry, but to protect himself. To protect the wall he'd built around a friendship that had once meant everything and ended in silence. It was his way of saying, "Don't mistake this for forgiveness. Don't think this means we're okay." And Jerry understood. In that moment, with cameras flashing, tears falling, America cheering, he understood completely. The hug may have been real. The emotion may have been overwhelming. But the bond was still broken. And Dean wanted Jerry to know it wasn't coming back. The reunion lasted less than 5 minutes. No skits. No performance. No revival of the act that had once captivated the world. Just a hug, a whisper, a few awkward words, and then Dean was gone. The cameras cut away. The audience clapped. Documentaries would replay it for decades as a triumphant moment of forgiveness. But the reality was far more tragic. Because that hug didn't bring healing. It brought clarity. Dean and Jerry never performed together again. They didn't call each other afterward. There were no late-night dinners, no shared memories, no laughs over old times. At award shows and charity events in the years that followed, they'd sometimes cross paths, nod politely, shake hands for a photo. But the warmth, the brotherhood, was gone. Jerry kept hoping, though. His son, Joseph, later said that his father never stopped believing that maybe one day Dean would reach out. That they'd finally talk, really talk. That they'd say what needed to be said, without cameras, without scripts, without pride. But Dean never did. And in 1995, when Dean Martin died, that hope died too. At the funeral, Jerry stood beside the casket and gave a eulogy that cracked his voice and shattered his composure. He spoke of joy, of brotherhood, of magic. And then, he cried like a man who'd just lost something he'd already lost decades ago. Reporters asked him again, one last time, "What did Dean whisper to you during the telethon?" Jerry shook his head. "I'll never tell. That was just for me." But now we know the truth. And the truth is, they never reconciled. That hug, it wasn't a new beginning. It was a beautifully staged goodbye. To the world, it looked like peace. 2 legends. 1 stage. A long overdue embrace. And for a fleeting moment, America believed in second chances. But what we saw wasn't forgiveness. It was performance. What we felt wasn't healing. It was heartbreak wearing a smile. Frank Sinatra thought he could fix it. That if he could just get them in the same room, everything would fall back into place. The chemistry, the laughter, the love. But Frank learned what Dean and Jerry had known all along. Some wounds don't heal in front of an audience. What makes this story so devastating isn't the fight. It's the fact that both men wanted reconciliation, but neither was willing to make the first move. They were waiting for the other to say, "I'm sorry," waiting for the other to drop their pride first. And while they waited, decades passed. Pride calcified. Regret settled in. Dean protected his heart with honesty. Jerry clung to hope with silence. And in the end, both of them died with something unresolved. The 1976 telethon became an iconic television moment, but behind the curtain, it was a missed opportunity dressed as a miracle. And maybe that's why it hit so hard. Because we've all been there. We've all waited for someone to reach out first. We've all let love rot under the weight of stubbornness. So if there's someone out there you've drifted from, someone you once called family, but now avoid in silence, don't wait. Don't wait until the stage lights come on and it's too late. Don't whisper distance when you could whisper forgiveness. Because life doesn't always give you second chances. And when it does, you don't get to choose the words you'll hear in return. Dean and Jerry gave the world a decade of joy and a lifetime of sorrow. And all it took was 7 words to remind us. Even the most beautiful reunion can still be a goodbye.